I never thought I'd be the person standing in the middle of a crowded grocery store, shaking with a mix of pure adrenaline and absolute rage while a woman screamed at the top of her lungs about things that were none of her business. But life has a funny way of throwing you into the deep end when you least expect it. My son Leo was clinging to my leg, his small face pale and his eyes wide with a kind of fear no 6-year-old should ever have to feel, all because a complete stranger decided that our family didn't look right to her. It started with a whisper and ended with a scene so chaotic the police had to be called. And now I'm sitting here wondering if I went too far in how I handled the aftermath. Was I wrong for the way I dismantled her life after she tried to dismantle my son's sense of belonging? Or would you have done the exact same thing to protect your child from a monster? I need you to listen to the whole story and tell me if my revenge was justified, or if I became the very thing I was fighting against. To understand how we got to that moment in the cereal aisle, you have to understand our journey. My wife, Sarah, and I struggled with infertility for nearly a decade. It was a cycle of hope and heartbreak that almost broke us, but it eventually led us to the most beautiful thing in our lives, adoption. When we first met Leo, he was 4 years old. He had been through the foster care system, and while he was the sweetest soul you'd ever meet, he carried a lot of trauma and a deep-seated fear of being returned. We spent 2 years building his confidence, showing him that he was ours forever, and that family isn't about DNA, it's about who shows up. Leo is of a different ethnicity than Sarah and me, which has never mattered to us for a single second, but we live in a town that is, shall we say, a bit traditional and sometimes nosy. We've had the occasional stare or the bless your heart comments from people who think they're being kind when they're actually being condescending, but we usually just brush it off. We were happy, we were a family, and that was all that mattered until we crossed paths with Linda. Linda was the kind of woman who acted like she owned the neighborhood association, even though she didn't even live on our block. She was always perfectly coiffed, wearing expensive athleisure, and carried a sense of entitlement that you could smell from a mile away. I'd seen her around town, usually complaining to a manager about a coupon or scolding a teenager for skateboarding, but I'd never had a direct interaction with her until that Tuesday afternoon. I had picked Leo up from school early because he'd had a great week, and I promised him we could pick out his favorite sugary cereal as a treat. We were in the grocery store, laughing and racing the cart down the aisle, when I noticed a woman watching us from the end of the row. It was Linda. She wasn't just glancing. She was staring with a look of pure, curdled disgust. I ignored it at first, thinking maybe she just hated fun, but as we got closer to her, she didn't move her cart. She blocked the entire aisle, arms crossed, waiting for us. I said a polite, "Excuse me," to get past, but she didn't budge. Instead, she looked down at Leo, then up at me, and said in a voice loud enough for 3 aisles to hear, "It's so sad what people do for attention these days." I was caught off guard and asked her what she meant. She scoffed, pointing a manicured finger at my son and said, "You clearly don't belong together. Are you his handler? Or did you just pick him up to look diverse for your social media? I've seen your type trying to be heroes by taking in these kids when they'd be better off with their own kind." My blood turned to ice. Leo gripped my hand so hard his knuckles turned white. I told her very calmly, despite the roar in my ears, that she needed to move her cart and keep her ignorant opinions to herself. But Linda wasn't done. She started raising her voice, calling me a kidnapper, and screaming that she was going to call the police because she didn't see a resemblance and felt the child was in danger. She actually reached out to grab Leo's arm, claiming she was rescuing him. That was the moment I snapped. I stepped between them, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, telling her that if she touched my son again, she wouldn't like the consequences. She went into full Karen mode, shrieking that I was assaulting her, throwing boxes of crackers off the shelves, and demanding the manager arrest me. The store manager arrived, and while he saw through her act immediately because he'd dealt with her before, the damage was done. Leo was sobbing, inconsolable, asking me in the car if he had to go back to the system, because the lady said he didn't belong with me. It took hours to calm him down. And that night, as I watched him sleep, I felt a cold, calculated rage I'd never felt before. I spent that entire night staring at the wall, thinking about how many times Leo must have felt unwanted before he came to us. Every nightmare he'd had, every time he asked if we were sure we wanted to keep him. It all came rushing back because of one woman's arrogance. I started thinking about the long-term psychological impact this could have on him. He was already a sensitive child, and now he had a face to attach to his deepest fears. I knew that if I didn't handle this properly, he would grow up thinking the world was against him. I began researching Linda. I didn't just want her to apologize. I wanted her to understand the magnitude of what she had done. I found out she wasn't just a random lady. She was a prominent figure in several local charities, often giving speeches about protecting the innocent. The hypocrisy was so thick I could practically taste it. I found her LinkedIn, her Facebook, and even old news articles where she praised herself for her community service. This woman built her entire identity on being a good person, while in reality, she was a predator who preyed on the vulnerable. I spent hours gathering evidence, contacting people who had commented on local forums about similar run-ins with a tall blonde woman who was aggressive in public spaces. It turned out I wasn't her first victim. She had a pattern of harassing anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of what a family should look like. One mother told me Linda had once followed her to her car because her daughter was having a meltdown, accusing her of not being the real mother because the child had a different skin tone. It was a systemic pattern of harassment. I spent days documenting every single instance I could find. I spoke to old neighbors who had stories of her calling Child Protective Services on a Hispanic family because their kids were playing in the sprinklers too loudly. I found out she once tried to ban a disabled child from a community park because his wheelchair was scuffing the pavement. The more I dug, the more I realized that Linda wasn't just a Karen. She was a professional bully who used her status to weaponize the law and social services against anyone she deemed unfit. She had a circle of equally entitled friends who shielded her, but they didn't know that I had the one thing they couldn't ignore: high-definition video of her attacking a child. I spent nights editing the footage, making sure the audio was crystal clear so no one could claim she was misheard. I added context, including her direct quotes about my son's kind, and the way she tried to physically separate us. I felt like a detective building a case for the trial of the century. My wife was worried I was becoming obsessed, but I explained to her that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about creating a world where Leo didn't have to look over his shoulder. I wanted to make an example out of her. I wanted every other Linda out there to see that when you come for a family, the family bites back. I spent thousands of dollars on a private investigator just to ensure I had her home address, her business partner's contact info, and the names of the donors for her nonprofit. I wanted to hit her from every possible angle, socially, professionally, and legally. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled her entire reputation, and what happened when she finally realized she picked the wrong father to mess with, I want to stop right here. This is the point where I had to decide. Do I let it go and be the bigger person for my son's sake? Or do I make sure she never does this to another family again? I was at a crossroads. So, I'm asking you, was I justified in seeking a way to hit her where it hurts? Or should I have just walked away? Pause for a second and comment below what you would have done if someone tried to grab your child and told them they didn't belong in your family. I really want to know if I'm the villain here. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I went to the grocery store and spoke to the manager again. I asked for the security footage, explaining that I was considering filing a formal police report for harassment and attempted child endangerment. The manager, who was a father himself and looked genuinely disgusted by Linda's behavior, handed it over without a second thought. I then spent the afternoon recording a video. Not a rant video, but a calm, clear explanation of what happened, interspersed with the security footage showing her screaming at a terrified 6-year-old and trying to grab him. I didn't post it to my personal Facebook. Instead, I sent it directly to the board of directors at her nonprofit and the local news station under the headline, "The Face of Your Family Values Organization." I also contacted a civil rights lawyer I knew, just to see if there were grounds for a lawsuit. The response was overwhelming. Within 4 hours, the video had gone viral locally. But I wasn't finished. I found out that Linda had a history of these neighborhood watch incidents where she targeted minority families. I reached out to a few of them, and we formed a collective voice. By the time the news reached out to her for comment, they had a file of complaints an inch thick. The board of her organization held an emergency meeting that evening. They couldn't have someone who publicly harassed adopted children, representing a group focused on family welfare. She was fired by sunset. But the climax didn't happen in an office. It happened in my driveway 2 days later. Linda showed up at my house, looking like a shell of the woman she was at the store. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were red, and she started screaming at me through the door, blaming me for ruining her life and taking away her career. She was hysterical, waving her hands around and shouting that I had orchestrated a hit job on her. I opened the door just a crack, with my phone recording, and I didn't yell. I told her, "You didn't lose your job because of me. You lost your job because of who you are when you think no one is watching. You tried to make my son feel like he didn't have a home, so I made sure you understood what it feels like to lose yours." She broke down, sobbing that she was stressed and didn't mean it that way. But the mask had slipped too far. I told her to get off my property before I called the police to finish what she started at the store. She left, but the legal battle was just beginning. She actually tried to sue me for defamation, but when her lawyers saw the security footage and the statements from the other families she had harassed, they dropped her as a client within 48 hours. She had become toxic. As far as I know, she had to sell her house and move out of the county, because no one would hire her and her neighbors wouldn't even look at her in the street. I heard she lost her membership at the country club, and was even asked to leave her church group. It was a complete social and professional exile. She tried to start a GoFundMe page claiming she was a victim of cancel culture. But the platform took it down within hours due to the nature of her actions. Every time she tried to rebuild, the video of her screaming at Leo would resurface. I made sure of it. I hired a digital reputation management firm, not to help me, but to ensure that the video remained the top search result for her name for the next decade. Some people might call that cruel, but I call it a consequence. I wanted her to feel the isolation that Leo felt when she told him he didn't belong. I wanted her to feel like she was being watched and judged every time she stepped out in public. It got to the point where she couldn't even go to the local cafe without people whispering and pointing. Her husband eventually filed for divorce, stating that he couldn't support her increasingly erratic and hateful behavior. She lost her home, her husband, her career, and her social standing, all because she couldn't keep her bigotry to herself in a grocery store. The aftermath was a long road for Leo. We put him back in therapy to deal with the flare-up of his abandonment issues, but seeing the community rally around us actually helped him more than anything. He saw that for every one bad lady, there were 100 people who saw him as our son and nothing else. We had neighbors bringing over cookies and cards, telling Leo how much they loved having him on the street. My wife and I are closer than ever, and while some people told me I was cruel for getting her fired and essentially making her a social pariah, I sleep like a baby knowing she'll think twice before ever putting her hands on a child again. I had to show Leo that being part of a family means having someone who will fight the world for you. I had to teach him that his identity isn't something a stranger can define. I spent weeks sitting with him, explaining that some people are sick in their hearts, and that their words have nothing to do with how much he is loved. We even started a local support group for adoptive families who have faced similar harassment. It turned into something beautiful, a community of people who look out for one another and provide a safe space for kids like Leo to just be kids. We hold monthly picnics and workshops, and the local police department even partnered with us to provide sensitivity training for their officers. Out of the darkness of that grocery store encounter, a huge light began to shine. I realized that my anger had been a catalyst for change. If I hadn't pushed back so hard, Linda would still be in her office, quietly ruining the lives of families behind the scenes. By exposing her, I stopped a cycle of abuse that had been going on for years. I saw Leo slowly start to smile again. He stopped asking if he had to leave, and he started talking about the future, about what he wanted to be when he grew up, about the college he might want to go to. That was my real victory. Not the fact that Linda was broken alone, but the fact that my son was whole again. I watched him play in the backyard yesterday, chasing our dog and laughing with a neighbor's kid, and I knew I had made the right choice. This experience taught me that silence in the face of bigotry is just a slow way of letting it win. If you see someone being targeted, especially a child, stand up. Don't worry about being polite to people who have no concept of the word. Justice isn't always something that happens in a courtroom. Sometimes it's something you have to go out and build yourself. I don't regret a single email I sent or a single minute of that video I edited. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by protecting my son and holding that woman accountable for her actions. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and family, and please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or did she get exactly what she deserved? I'll see you all in the next story.